It's quite a challenge, I think, doing this by sort of online. I can't think of the word. Yeah, online. It's quite a challenge doing this online because while we're presenting, we're obviously looking at the slides. Maybe can't find it hard to track the chat and to see, how people are responding, particularly if they don't have cameras on. So we're going to try and build spaces into the session this morning to allow people to feedback. And one of the things that we do want to encourage is that you try and participate and that, this is the start of a process to review what's come out of a survey that I think's got some, interesting findings to it, but that is going to kick off the process that's not going to be an overnight process of responding to some of those things that have come out. So that's probably the first thing I'll say, and I think we've got some let me just see my slides. Hang on. And then, we've got some of the results to share with you. We've also got coming a written report with lots of detail about the results, which when that's finalised, we'll share that. But one of the things that we wanted to do, certainly, sooner rather than later, was to give people who participated in the survey and to give those in the multiple complex needs network some feedback on what's come out of the survey sooner rather than later, and then encourage people to think about what's coming out and engage in discussion about how we make sense of it. So it's very much the sense making process that we're kicking off now, and that we'll follow up with sort of some more sessions. It'll probably be in the new year now, given where we are in terms of time of year, but we wanted to share some findings before that happened in January onwards, because otherwise it's too long to wait, I think, for people, and it's already been a while since the survey was conducted. So yeah, I think it's just to say that we've got a plan for today in terms of we'll give you some context from the survey. We'll talk about how you can read and interpret some of the results. We'll give you some detail about how the results are broken down, and then some discussion about how we move forward with this and then the future process. And all of this is kind of open to feedback and comments and engagement from people on the call and in the network as well. So none of it's necessarily set in stone, other than the commitment to engaging people to understand and make sense of the findings and figure out how we kind of take it forward and turn it into something practical. So feel free to share your thoughts and responses in the chat. We'll do our best to keep up with them, and that there's quite a lot of data that we're gonna share. And it might feel a bit overwhelming at first. We have had a working group that has sort of led on this, the development of the survey and the process for kind of sharing it and how we kind of move forward with it. So we're sort of the presentation of the results to that smaller group. So the group has sort of seen the results and had a bit more of a chance to digest them, respond to them, think about them. But we're sharing this with the wider network as early as possible, so that we're all on the having the same information. And what we'll try and do today is to kind of share the data as objectively as possible. There are probably bits of it that will trigger sort of responses in one way or another. We don't know how you'll react to it. Some of it you may find quite challenging, some of it you may find upsetting, some of it you may find positive. No idea how you'll respond to it. I guess I'm only saying that because within the group where we shared it before, we quite a range of response to it, and that is going to be an important part of the process in terms of understanding how people feel about the results, as well as what they want to do with them. So I think Catherine's going to go through now a bit more detail about the context of the survey.
I am. It's very weird doing this in presentation mode because I can't actually see anything apart from the presentation. So if something goes wrong, please literally shout, otherwise I won't know. So this is just to give a bit of context to the survey, and a bit of context to the Multiple Complex Needs Network. So the network started in March 2018 and bringing together people with lived experience, frontline workers and strategic leads to think and act collectively with the aim of better supporting people facing severe and multiple disadvantage or multiple complex needs in York. And just for a little wider context, what we mean by severe and multiple disadvantage or multiple complex needs is people experiencing issues such as substance misuse, offending, mental ill health, homelessness, and associated problems that go alongside those sorts of issues. And in 2019, the network decided to develop a number of different experiments and take them forward as working groups. And one of these was to do a cultural values survey with the aim of trying to better understand the multiple complex needs system in York. And I think although the pandemic has thrown lots of things into flux, it's meant that there's a real opportunity to review the culture of the system over different time periods, so we can understand what the culture was like pre-COVID, as well as how COVID may have changed things in the system, and think about how we can use that knowledge to focus where we want to go forward and improve kind of the health of the system. So for those who I don't know who has or hasn't taken the survey, so just a bit of context about what it asked you, and it mainly asked about people's personal values, what motivates us, the current cultural climate, including what is and isn't working, and also about what people wanted in for the future culture, so what people desired the culture to be like and felt like would make it work better. And all of this together and everything we'll go through in the next couple of hours will help get an understanding of the whole health of the system culture in York at the moment. And the next few slides, we're going to go on and explain a little bit how to read the results, because there are various different concepts that you will come up against, and hopefully it will just provide you a little bit of background of how to approach them.
Thanks, Catherine. So yeah, so this is the start slide of kind of how to read the results. So the results are often presented in a format like this that looks a bit like an hourglass, and it's got seven levels. So Catherine will sort of talk a bit more about that in terms of the survey, the four
He is frozen. I'm assuming for everyone.
Yeah, it's
frozen. He's gone.
Yeah. I'm assuming you can all hear me.
Yeah.
Cool. Right. I will let him know that he has frozen, and I shall keep going. So in terms of the four, what he was going to say is the survey asking about four different periods, which we will go through. So personal values, pre-COVID culture, current culture, and desired values. And every one of those has been turned into a profile by Barrett. And I think Nick is now back. Nick,
I'm back. Yeah, sorry, I don't know what happened there. The technology, yeah, just decided it didn't want me talking anymore. So yeah, thanks for picking that up. I'm not sure where you got to with that side. Do you want to finish it off, or?
Yeah, I was just saying the four different profiles, and the way that they've condensed all of the feedback is to put them into what is called a dot plot. And I'll just go on to explain. So this Barrett Values 7-level model is based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it helps to understand the values and where they are associated in terms of the level of or where the need or issue may be occurring in the system. So, for example, the bottom is 1 and is survival, so it's around safety and security and survival and needs that are associated with those issues. And you can see the different kind of positive or negative focus on the right hand side there, and on the left hand side that's the reference that you'll get through the different dot plots, just to help remember what the values might be associated with. So I'm going to take you now through a dot plot just so you know what to expect before we unleash all of the data on you. Is that all right, Nick?
Yeah, no, sounds good. Thank you.
Cool. So an example of a dot plot, and it shows, like I said, it kind of is mapped onto the Barrett values 7-level model. And as I said there, the different words associated with the different levels are there on the left hand side, and it's 1 at the bottom and 7 at the top. And on this model, you'll see there are blue dots and white dots, and the blue dots are positive values. So these dot plots are associated with the top 10 values that have come up in each of those profiles. So the personal values, pre-COVID, current culture, and desired culture. And the blue dots are positive and show where energy exists that we might want to pick up and work with, or look at kind of providing energy and positivity in the system. And the white dots are potentially limiting values. So they suggest that there are issues or things within the system that may be limiting the potential of the wider system or individuals in the system, and contributing to challenges that people are feeling in the system. And underneath each dot plot, when we go through all of the results, there is the top 10 values preference from highest to lowest that people have chosen. And ones in orange italics are those that are repeated across 2 time periods. So if you see any in italics, it means that they've also featured in the top 10 values in a different time period. So for example, pre-COVID and current culture, adaptability might feature in the top 10 values for both of those. So we start to get a picture of the values which are strongly correlated across different time periods. And the number on the right hand side is the number of times the value was chosen by participants. So it just gives you an indication of the popularity, or how much people might feel that value is present. And then the values with an L in brackets, and obviously it's quite, I know you'll be looking at this on a screen and might not necessarily be able to see this level of detail easily, but ones with L in brackets next to it are potentially limiting values. So those are the ones that contribute to the white dots and are areas that contribute to the entropy rate, which is a word that feels uncomfortable to use because I still am not 100% sure how to explain what it is, but we will do our best and try and explain it now. So essentially, cultural entropy is the measure of negative force or resistance in a system. So it's when a system is feeling limited, or like the ability to change or progress is being limited by certain factors and values that are present in the system. So where there is entropy and there's a difference between people's personal values and values present in a culture, it's likely that people find it difficult to make their best contribution. So I think that's probably the easiest way to think about entropy, is that it's sort of holding people back and holding the wider system back, and how positive the system could be in affecting change or getting to doing the thing that it's there to do. And it's calculated by the ratio of positive to potentially limiting values, and it's presented as a percentage. And I think, yeah, it's just worth remembering that it's not necessarily negative, but there are values that are existing that are sort of limiting, and that one word highly associated with entropy is dysfunction, which sort of helps to create the picture of it. And so it's presented as a percentage based on the number of limiting values to positive values. And the higher the entropy rate means the more resistance or dysfunction in the system. And just for a bit of context, typically if entropy is above 25%, it's considered high by Barrett Value Centre, and a healthy system is considered to have an entropy rate of 12% or below. So those are kind of two numbers that are quite useful to hold in your heads amongst all of this data, just to provide the context of what things look like. And we know that that's a lot of information of just how to read the results and none of the results themselves, but we wanted to just ask if you have any questions about that. And of course, feel free to shout whilst we're presenting later on if you want anything clarified.
I have a really quick question, because it's really interesting looking at how you're kind of assessing the data. Was this done automatically? Is this a sort of program that does this for you?
So it's Barrett Value Centre, an international organisation, and they usually work with businesses and in the private sector, and they've started sort of delving in the public sector and across kind of voluntary sector as well. And they do have multiple different ways of doing it, and it's a whole program that, and we've worked with a Barrett Values consultant who comes in and helps you work out which values to choose in terms of the questionnaire, and also then goes through and analyzes the data. So it feels slightly automatic because we've had a consultant working with us to make sense of it, but she's done a lot of the hard work and pulling out of things.
Yeah, and it's a specific methodology that they follow that allows them to interpret the results and attribute those kind of layers on the dot plot to the values that are selected predominantly, and then when we go through the detail, we can explain how we've broken down the results, or how we could interpret the results between the different groups of people that have participated.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Nope. Okay. I shall move on to the next slide.
So one question in the chat about why it was an hourglass in terms of the shape. I honestly don't think there's any meaning for that. I think it's just a visual representation. I just described it as an hourglass because that's how it looks to me. I'm not aware that there's any kind of reasoning behind it. It's not a representation of, you know, the value of the things that go into the different levels. It's just, I think it's just a visual representation.
Yeah, and if anything, actually, it's slightly contradictory, given when some of the areas that have the most energy are in the middle parts, around like transformation and like levels 4 and 5, which have the smallest bit of the hourglass. So yeah, I don't think that there is anything. I think it's mainly just because it's developed from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So yeah.
Okay, so we'll move on. In terms of the results, we've got some information now about some of the demographics of the participants that took part. So for those who did the survey, you might remember being asked some questions about you in terms of your personal information, and some of that was used to kind of compare the results between different groupings. We've got a whole load of information about personal values, and we're kind of breaking that down by the groups that people identified themselves as being part of, whether it be where they sit in the organisation or their role, or the type of role that they perform. And then we've got some details about how values may change over time. So compare those kind of pre-COVID values to the current, and then to what people desire from the future. So we've got this presented as a a sort of a visual sphere, which I always get confused with the X and Y axis. Whatever the one along the bottom is time, and then whatever the one going up is, I don't know why I can never remember it, X and Y. I'm not sure. Someone can put in the comments about what's what, but yeah, time and so we've got the pre-COVID values, we've got the current values, and then we've got the values that people want to see displayed within the system. And then going up, we've got all the demographic stuff. So we've got things like the age, the ethnicity, gender. We've got the sector that people worked in, so we ask questions about where people work. We've got the roles that people did. So primarily, people were identifying whether they were a frontline support worker, working in administration, someone with lived experience, a senior manager, a manager or supervisor, or a volunteer or trustee. And then we've got some information about whether people were a network member or not. And then, yeah, the type of role that they perform. So whether that was advocacy, someone in the creative arts, in criminal justice, domestic abuse, education and skills, finance and sort of poverty support, generalist support, homelessness, housing, mental health. Now, when we developed it, we had to think of ways to kind of try and break it down to allow that comparison within different parts of the system. So we realized that we may not have covered everything, but we were asking people to identify what their kind of primary role was and allocate those to things that the group felt were the priority ones within the system. So there may be people who took part in the survey that feel that it didn't fit fully with what they do, but we had to sort of break it down somehow, and those are the categories that we chose. And then so that's how we'll sort of breaking it down. So those are the bits of information that we ask people to submit, and that's what the results are kind of compared against. So in terms of demographics, it was predominantly a white British female group aged between 35 to 64. So 64% of people participating were female, 90% white British, and 78% between 35 to 64 age group. We had quite a mix. So I mean, whether somebody was a member or a non-member of the network was fairly even. Nearly half people reported not being a network member, compared to just over a third who did, and then some people, I suppose, didn't feel sure whether or not they were. And then in terms of roles, so the type of role that people reported, we had the majority of responses from frontline support workers, then managers, supervisors. I mean, you can see that on the bar chart. We had people who reported lived experience as being 10% of the responses. Interestingly, though, when we come to the results on how impactful lived experience is on your views, there was a far greater response rate to indicate that lived experience was quite influential in how people thought, which I think is interesting in how we look at what we class as lived experience, and whether people sort of in the system doing some of these roles have lived experience themselves, and how important that is when we're thinking about, you know, the system as a whole. Yeah, and I must just say as well, we're trying to avoid coming across as Chris Whitty and next slide please things. So Catherine's doing a great job in whizzing through the slides. I haven't had to ask once because she's got control of this sharing screen. But if I do slip into it, I apologise. I'm not trying to be Chris Whitty because he's far more clever than I am. Right, so who took part? We've got, yeah, so people reporting that they do some generalist support was kind of the largest category, followed by people who felt that they work with supporting people around mental health, and then quite a range of people in other sectors. In order to do the comparison effectively between those groups, we needed a certain kind of proportion of people in order to make the comparison suitable. And I've forgotten the word for whether something is robust in a scientific way. Whatever, yeah. Anyway, there had to be a certain number of people in order to allow the comparison to be effective. So we weren't actually able to compare absolutely every area of work, because we didn't have enough across all of the categories, but we did across most, which is helpful. And then, yeah, we had another sort of breakdown of where people sort of felt they sat in terms of, community voluntary sector or statutory sector or lived experience. So that's another sort of breakdown, and all of this detail will be in the written report. So I guess what we're sharing with you today is a summary of what we feel are the key findings, but obviously there's a lot more detail in the actual report. So when that comes out, people can kind of look through that and interpret it for themselves. And we're trying to put this across in a very sort of objective way, rather than drawing any specific conclusions. So in terms of the personal values that people reported, so this is the first dot plot, which kind of plots the values that people reported against those sort of 7 levels, and you can see that the bulk of the values that people reported are around that sort of level 4 and 5 area, and those levels are associated with alignment with purpose and energy for change. So I think in terms of personal values that came out from the people who completed the survey, that's predominantly where they're sitting, and that the values that were chosen represent sort of caring, compassion, and making a difference. As you can see to the right of the slide, those were the most frequently chosen values. And being able to collaborate, be creative, and invest in relationship values of honesty, inclusivity, equality, integrity, those are all important as well. And where values like these and listening emerge, it can sometimes be a reflection of what people aspire to rather than what they're experiencing currently. So that's one of the things that sort of come out in the report. And I guess what we're looking for is whether these important values appear in the current culture. So this is the assessment of people's personal values, and one of the things that indicates whether there's entropy within the system is how closely the personal values align to how people see the current system. So that's the sort of interesting part of the results, really, in terms of seeing how clearly they align. Right. Okay. And then, yeah, that's it. Sorry, I'm running a presentation on my screen and as well, so I can keep up, and I've got confused with the slides. But yeah, that's the end of my slides.
So I'm going to just talk you through values over time. So looking at the pre-COVID to current values to start with, and then we will go on to look at kind of the desired picture for the system. So here is the dot plot of the pre-COVID values for the system that we're talking about here. And remember, we're looking for the appearance of blue positive dots and then white potentially limiting dots. So we can see from this first dot plot that there is quite a lot of limiting values that were in the system pre-COVID, and it has an entropy rate of 46% was for York pre-COVID. And Barrett classified this as a dysfunctional system with deep structural issues to address and need for immediate work at all levels. And I think it's interesting to look at where those clusters are of the potentially limiting values, and they're at levels 1 and levels 3. And those are levels associated with the system for level 3, and level 1 around safety, security and sustainability. But the full value profile suggests there was more control, competition and blame culture pre-COVID, and the sense that the system was change averse. So looking at this picture compared to the current system, and this is current as of August 2020, so not right now, but how things were feeling in August, we can see that there is an increase of blue dots, so an increase of positive values, and a slight reduction in the number of white, potentially limiting values. And the entropy rate in the culture in August was 35%, which is still considered high, but that is an 11% reduction. And it's important to note that that 11% reduction would normally take, according to Barrett Values Centre, about a year or more, and it's been achieved in 6 months. And a lot of energy for change that has been cultivated through the change that COVID and lockdown has presented us, and it's been achieved by a reduction in level 3 entropy and increase in positive values like adaptability, community involvement and cross-group collaboration. And participants are clearly motivated by increased opportunities to adapt and collaborate, especially at a community level. So there is, however, still a main value cluster at level 1. So this could indicate the system is experiencing an overall sense of core instability, and being aware of these limiting issues are still existing. So there is no change in that bottom level 1 entropy cluster compared to pre-COVID and current. And this the values underneath these dot plots here give you a sense of the top values chosen over these time periods. And the blue values were desired pre-COVID and emerged in the current culture. So we can see under there that although people are motivated there to address the issues, potential isn't always expressed in the current culture. And challenges faced in the current culture focus around lack of resources, short-term focus, uncertainty about the future and confusion. And we have to obviously take into account the pandemic, and these could all be seen as general cultural factors. But although the system is still experiencing this level of core instability, the shift in entropy rate suggests a reduction in system pressures being experienced in the current culture. And it's just important to recognise that the current culture has seen this emergence of new energy for change, and people have felt they've been able to adapt and participate and collaborate and behave more as a community. And although this will be difficult to see on your screens, this just gives you a little bit more beyond the top 10 values that have been chosen. So these are the top 20 values for pre-COVID and in the current culture. And the values in orange are ones that have decreased over time. So you'll see in the top 20 for pre-COVID, the orange values aren't present in the top 20 in the current culture. And values that have increased in over time are in blue. And the first column shows more of the limiting values in the pre-COVID culture. And there's a lot of limiting factors working against the core motivations of people in the system. So when we think about this compared to the personal values profile, it means that people's personal values are less able to come through and be expressed in the culture there. And this pre-COVID top 20 values sees the presence of control, blame, information hoarding, and internal competition. And in the current culture on the right-hand side, those sort of issues have reduced, and the shift is reflected in those blue values and new emerging things like resilience and social responsibility and cooperation. There has been the emergence of job insecurity, long hours and caution, and I think that is, again, we take into the context of the pandemic. and it's important that we explore these values that have come up consistently over different time periods, or new things that have emerged in the sense making sessions, rather than making assumptions, because obviously how one person interprets what one word means is different from another person, and so that process will be really, really important to really collectively understand what people are talking about. So now we're just going to have a few minutes to digest the lot of information we've thrown at you thus far. So what we're going to do for these sort of check-ins is suggest that you take a few minutes yourself to maybe make some notes and think about what stands out, what people are saying, and how it lands with you. And then it would be great if you could share at least one thing that you want to share with others in the chat, and we can reflect back. So if you just take a few minutes now and start popping things in the chat when you're ready.
I suppose just to give people enough time, rather than rushing. I suppose we were thinking of this being about 5 minutes, and I know it's not the same way that we'd do it if we were all in the same room, because we might encourage some conversation, but I think it's difficult to do in this way. So I guess that's why we've chosen to do it like this. But it would be great if at least one comment in, just to sort of give us an update on kind of what stands out and what you're thinking around what you've heard so far. So if we give people 5 minutes to do that, that would be great. Thank you.
Catherine, whilst you're doing that, could you pop back to the previous slide?
Yes, because I know your question you've just asked. I was thinking that it might, you will be able to tell if they're the same issues. So I'm just looking at this, and those level 1 values, the caution has replaced the change aversion in the white dots represented on the dot plot. So 3 out of the 4 level 1 limiting values are the same between those 2 time periods.
Hi, sorry to interrupt. It's Astrid here.
Hello.
Hello, I'm really sorry. I had technical problems. For some reason, it won't let me put in the chat box all sorts of issues this morning. So I thought I'd say hello and apologise when I'm not contributing to the chat. It's just all gone a bit awry. So sorry about that.
And if you want to jump in and say anything verbally rather than having to pop it in the chat, then go for it, and we can yeah, just so your voice is there.
Thank you for that. I just thought I'd let you know I'm here and not being mysterious. Thank you.
Thank you, Astrid.
I suppose, and just to say, if anyone else is experiencing the same problems, just maybe let us know, because yeah, everyone should be able to access the chat. It'd just be useful to know if people can't for whatever reason.
And yeah, anyone who can and can pop any kind of one thing that stands out to you, or initial reactions to some of that, please do.
That's fine. We'll let you off with the thumbs up on your own comment, Pandora. It happens. It was worthy of a thumbs up anyway. Okay, we're getting some comments coming in, which is great. So thank you, everybody. Really some interesting comments. So we had some questions around what is meant by social responsibility, which I don't know whether you want to answer that, Catherine, or.
I guess so. When we're thinking about the Barrett values levels, it's the interpretive nature of these things, and I know there was another thing around survival and what's meant by survival, and those basic kind of level 1 things, and I think that is the part of the process of that people have answered this survey with their own thoughts and interpretations, and it's this conversation now, albeit through a chat rather than in a room, having smaller group conversations, is start of that process of what do we mean by social responsibility, and is there hopefully through the sense making process and various meetings and kind of a process that will be held at the start of next year, we can make sense of what that means for us now, and for in York in this context, because I guess you could get a definition of social responsibility, but it might not mean much, and we can make it our own. So that's sort of me getting out of giving a full answer to that, but I think it's not right for me to try and say what is necessarily meant by that. I think it's part of this. What do we mean collectively about it? And hopefully we can start to make sense of that together in the next few months or so.
Yeah. I think it's probably important to keep in mind as well that there's really quite a lot of potential for interpretation and quite a lot of depth in what's coming out of this, and I suppose what we're trying to encourage is that, you know, we support a process of making sense of it and coming to some kind of outcomes in terms of how we might want to move forward as a system, but we're not seeing as necessarily happening overnight or just being determined by, you know, us presenting the results and then people coming up with answers straight away, because I don't think any of this is simple stuff. There are so many different factors and everyone's got a different perspective, as we'll see. You know, the values vary between, you know, groups of people, whether they're network members or not network members, whether they're the type of role that they're doing, and whether people are kind of reporting having lived experience or not as well. So there are loads of factors to kind of unpick and make sense of, and I suppose also kind of connects to that question about, you know, recognition that there's been a reduction of in-person contact and whether that's had an impact. And absolutely, I would imagine that's a factor, but that may vary depending on the staff group or the role. Probably, well, potentially more impactful on frontline workers compared to managers, for example. But you know, that may not be the case. People might have their own views on that. But I suppose also important to remember that we asked people to share their values within particular contexts. So it doesn't necessarily give us all the detailed answers to some of those questions that we're asking. But it maybe gives us some indication.
So thank you everyone for all of your thoughts, and do keep writing as we go, and I will now go on to the values over time and looking at the desired values for the future. So this is sort of helps us to see where there's consensus about what people want to do about the current situation as they see it, and where we might want to move collectively. So this is the dot plot for what people said about the desired culture. And at a glance, we can see there's a significant clustering at level 4. So indicates that's kind of where there's energy, indicates there's energy for change. And in this case, people are saying that they want a focus on learning, adaptation and development. And looking at these may be useful when thinking about where we want to invest. And the top 10 values for this profile you can see here. So we've got community involvement as the top, then cross-group collaboration, adaptability, accessibility, embracing diversity, cooperation, holistic thinking, accountability, continuous learning, and information sharing. And values that already appear in the system, whether in the current culture or in the current culture, are shown in orange. So they were present in the current culture as of August 2020. And I know a comment has been made, I know Chris said about how that's different now, and I think that is worth bearing in mind, but it's useful to see how we can progress into what people want in the desired culture. And people really want a focus on relationships and systems level issues. So it suggests, this profile kind of suggests that relationships are integral to a good system culture, and people want greater involvement from a more diverse range of people. They want to see genuine collaboration, and they accept this will require adaptation across the board. And in terms of the system of the future, it's a call to be more holistic and inclusive, and to be designed around principles of accountability and information sharing. So those top three kind of values people want to focus on are community involvement, cross-group collaboration, and adaptability. And there is recognition that to achieve change on this scale, there will be need for individual and system adaptations and investment in learning. And you can see that just from the fact where the dots on the dot plot are sat in the different levels. So when we just look at this next to the current culture, so in the current culture, there was a strong consensus around community involvement and cross-group collaboration and adaptability. And this forms the core of the approach to a more sustainable and desired future. So again, people, just reiterating, people want investment in learning to drive overall systems improvement. So those are the headlines of the three different time periods and people's personal values. So just to summarize, the system currently has a high entropy rate at 35%, but there has been an 11% improvement based from the 46% pre-COVID score. There is real energy for change, and the shifts and adaptations generated by the pandemic have been welcomed in the sense that they've generated movement and new energy for change. But it is inhibited by things such as uncertainty about the future, caution, lack of resources, and a short-term focus. There are common values across all areas, so it's useful to see that there is consensus about things across different areas, and these include community involvement, cross-group collaboration, and adaptability. And it's, I think, from Barrett Value's point of view, when they were going through this with us, it's they were kind of reflecting, and it's amazing to see the energy and motivation that exists in the system, particularly given the level of entropy that is being experienced. Even in the current culture, there is this energy and desire to learn and adapt to affect further change. So from their point of view, and kind of gathering everything that people have said through this survey, is that is a want to focus on the core values of community involvement, cross-group collaboration, and adaptability moving forwards, to kind of build on and further improve the entropy and the limitations that are being experienced in the current system. So now we've gone through those different time periods, and before we go into kind of some of the similarities and differences between people and sectors that we broke down through the demographics, it's just another bit of time to check in and think about what stands out for you, what's hit home, and maybe thinking about where you see optimism, where you see potential challenges. And again, if you want to just take a few minutes to have a think and make some notes, and then share anything and any thoughts or questions in the chat, that'd be great.
Would it be helpful just to put the slide up with the visual of change over time?
Do you mean this one, Nick?
Hang on, I'm looking at another screen at the minute. Yeah, that one, or the one that said desired system culture, the one that had the text alongside it, the last one, and the hourglass thing.
Yeah, so we've got desired. There we go.
Yeah, that's one. Okay, we're starting to get some comments in, so thanks for that. I guess conscious of time and kind of managing this, we'll maybe start to move on. So where are we on the slides now? Oh, right, yeah, okay. So yeah, so we've talked about the kind of the high level summary of changes over time as everyone who's contributed. We can look in a bit more detail now between some of those groups that we talked about before. So the first set of results that we've got here in the dot plot is for network members. So on this slide you'll see three dot plots. So the personal values, the cultural values, and the desired cultural values. And you can see there, you know, that some differences. So this is all really the interesting detail within the report, and it's difficult to present it to you and give you time to kind of reflect on it and really drill down on it in, you know, just flashing it up on a slide. But this is the detail that we will sort of follow on and share within the actual report. I suppose we just felt it was important to kind of present it in a way that kind of gives you some context and gives you a bit more background, rather than just sort of sending out a report without the opportunity to have some sort of discussion or a bit more information about it. But we will obviously share everything with you so that you can spend, you know, the time that you might need to kind of review it and to look at these graphs. But you can see here that within network members, the entropy rate we've talked about is high. Yeah, we know that. We've got, you know, within the current culture quite a distinctly different profile to the desired culture and the personal values. I mean, there are some consistencies there, but we've got, you know, where people feel agency for you know, within the current culture is around the sort of level 4 and level 6 mark, which, you know, it is positive in a way, because it's about those more positive values rather than the potentially limiting ones, of which, you know, there are still several within there as well. And you know, I suppose even within those positives, the current culture, you know, still seen as having high entropy and therefore, you know, dysfunctional. But the desired culture and how to move forward is probably the interesting one to look at, because that's where people want to be, and that's an interesting mix of kind of values that are predominantly across the higher levels. So, you know, the less personal sort of internally focused values, and the more outward looking system supporting values. And the way forward is a bit of a focus on building capability to adapt and strengthen community involvement and collaboration. And I suppose compassion is important to this group, but it's not kind of experienced in the current culture. So that's one of the key differences. And I think it does indicate there's a kind of high level of belief and aspiration for, you know, social impact to underpin system change. But again, those are some of the things that you know we'll have to discuss in the sense making sessions and work out what it means for us as a system and individual staff members. And there's quite a different profile for non-network members. So those are the people that are identified as not being a current multiple complex needs network member. And there's quite you can see a different profile in terms of personal values, the current cultural and the kind of desired culture. So there's something there about the basic kind of level 1 system level issues and level 3 sort of insecurity and confusion becoming additional challenges for people who are sort of non-network members, and I guess that'd be an interesting thing to understand where that difference comes from. A bit more of a limited personal agency in terms of the current culture. So the profile of that being quite different, with far more potentially limiting values being identified within that group compared to the network members group. And then in terms of the desired outcome, you can see there that's again quite different to what's seen as the current culture, and what the personal values are reported as. So those differences, I guess, is what we're talking about in terms of the entropy. That's an indication the personal values being very different to the perceived current value, and what is desired, those being quite different is kind of a source of some of that entropy. And then in terms of the consistency and consensus, even though those profiles are quite different, both groups do want to build on and invest in community involvement and adaptability. And those things are both at the heart of the group's vision for the future, really. And building on consensus across the groups is potentially a good place to start. Community involvement and adaptability is the things that it seems that both of these groups want to build on and invest in, and perhaps that kind of consensus point is where we might sort of look at as a starting point. But again, those are the things that will come out of the centre. And then we looked at different sectors. So this was the statutory versus voluntary sector, and then lived experience. And this first profile is the statutory sector profile, and the personal values here focus very much on kind of mission and purpose, value relationships, and want to be more focused on making a difference through collaboration and compassion. So again, that sort of collaboration and compassion theme seems to be coming through very strongly. Within this group, the entropy rate is 26%. So lower than the system as a whole, but still, what Barrett's would class as medium high. There's a positive value cluster at sort of level 4, which suggests that this group are experiencing strong sort of energy for transformation around adaptability and resilience and teamwork, and things like home-work balance. The things that are potentially limiting are things around uncertainty, lack of resource, and caution. And then in terms of the desired culture, there's a want to focus on a vision of kind of holistic thinking, social responsibility, and long-term perspective, and the understanding, or I think the view that would be achieved through sort of greater community involvement and collaboration, as well as reaching a shared vision. So that's a summary of the statutory sector. The voluntary and community sector is next, and again, I think you can see here that the difference between the personal values and the current values, and then the desired values. This group reported a particularly high entropy rate, or they didn't report it, but that's what the values survey has identified, of 42%, which obviously is a different profile to those who are working in the statutory sector. So that distinction and that difference is to kind of explore in a bit more detail as the network. 8 out of 10 of the top values in the current culture were reported as potentially limiting. So you can see that sort of middle dot plot being very different profile to the statutory sector. And the things that hamper it are around uncertainty, lack of resources, short-term focus, confusion, caution, hierarchy, bureaucracy. Community involvement and adaptability are main areas of energy in the current culture, and I think it's entropy in this element of the system is almost inhibiting development of the whole. So efforts to tap into the energy and creativity of the individual level, and efforts to reduce or maintain shifts in system challenge might be a useful approach in terms of kind of next steps thinking. And the desired culture here is focused around sort of building on that energy for change, so adaptability, learning, accountability, information sharing. And I think really what that might indicate is that as a group, that those are people asking for a bit of investment in them as people and them as members of the system. So adaptability is the value there that kind of transcends all of those different kind of values points, and it's valued at a personal level, it's valued at a system level, and it's valued at a kind of future desired level. And then finally, the third group that we looked at was those with lived experience, which was a relatively small cohort compared to others. But I think, as we'd sort of identified before, those who reported having lived experience and were in that group, that there may also be others who are in the voluntary and statutory sector who are kind of really influenced by the lived experience, but they were identifying more as people in the statutory and voluntary sector rather than those with lived experience. But actually, this is a group that we probably need to pay real attention to, because it's people that are reporting, how they're experiencing the system. And again, at high levels of entropy, with 8 out of the 10 values chosen being in those that are potentially limiting. And the personal values very much motivated by sort of personal agency and purpose, or alignment, purpose and passion, alignment. The current culture, again, I suppose the highest of the three, the entropy rate at 49%. And for this group, things that are fairly basic in terms of security and system barriers seem to be quite inhibitive to kind of personal agency and energy in the current culture. So community involvement is probably the one positive in what's coming out as the assessment for this group. And then, the real focus for what's important, what's the desired culture, is around community involvement, collaboration, the things at level 6. So that's hopefully a good summary of the three groups that we chose. And then we move on to different roles. So we've got senior managers here. So those are the people that identified in that role, and then we've got here the personal values, the current culture, and the desired values. The thing on this graph seems to be that the personal values and the desired values are fairly, the patterns are distinctly different to what the current values are. And it's another group that is kind of oriented around that sort of level 5 hierarchy in terms of the values. So integrity, honesty, enthusiasm, creativity, trust. And it's useful to consider maybe how much of that is being expressed in the current culture, because that seems to be quite a different profile. As a group, they've got an entropy rate of about 31%. So, comparatively to some other groups, it may be less, but it's still, very high. Barrett's Centre would kind of see that as a very high rate. So I think it's important to remember with all this, while we're doing some comparison, that actually all of the groups that we're talking about here have high entropy rates. Comparatively, they might look better than, or lesser than some other groups, but they're all high. And yeah, just interesting to have a note of what the sort of desired culture looks like and how that differs. Conscious that I'm probably sort of some of you may feel rushing through this a little bit. It's difficult to, I don't want to interpret it too much on your behalf, just trying to sort of give you a summary of what's coming out, and obviously when we can share the slides, you can look at this in a bit more detail, but trying to focus on the key things that are coming out. So one of the other groups that's worth looking at is those in terms of frontline support. So this group reports an entropy rate of 41%, so again really high. So you can see there the different profiles between personal values, current values, and desired outcomes. And the current values have got lots of sort of limiting factors in the same way as the community and voluntary sector profile had. And it's the increased ability to adapt and have community involvement that seems to be sort of sustaining that group at the moment. And I suppose it's interesting to note inclusiveness is a top value for this group personally, and it also features in the desired culture, but it's not present in the current culture at all. So it's, I think the interesting thing with these results is to look at what's different, where the imbalance is between the personal values, the current culture, and the desired outcomes. And I think you may have noticed that it seems that the personal values and the desired cultures seem to be more closely connected, and there seems to be a greater difference between the personal values and the current culture in general terms. And I suppose the lack of inclusivity, what's that linked to? Is it linked to this kind of consistent call for community involvement that seems to be a bit of a theme across all of the groups? So and all of those things is what we want to sort of start exploring and unpicking from the sense making session. And then finally, we'll just kind of summarise the group for who work in social care. It was a very small cohort, but again, it's an interesting profile. It's a cohort that's motivated by external alliances, purpose alignment, and relationships. It's got
jump in because it seems like in my slide pack I don't have that slide, so you're going to talk to it, Nick, and people are not going to be able to see it, but do talk to it, and I'll try and see if I can. I don't know where it's gone.
Right. Okay.
But keep going.
It's probably hard to see without having a visual of it, but it was the third group that we were going to cover, but obviously it's got removed out of the slide pack for some reason. But it's a group that has a slightly lower entropy rate of 28%, but they've still got those limiting current cultural values at kind of levels 1 and 3. It's a group that seemed to experience considerable agency and energy in the current culture, maybe perhaps more than other groups, and that's around sort of their purpose, alignment, and partnership approach. And the desired culture for this group is probably more aligned to the current culture than for some other groups. So I think the point is that it's interesting to look at the differences between people who are identifying within one group of staff or one bit of the system compared to others, because that will give us some indication of perhaps where the system may be working more effectively or maybe more aligned to between the values and the desired values. So have we got the next slide? The summary one, is that? Yeah. Is it up there? Yeah. Okay. So in terms of entropy levels, I suppose it just reinforces the point is that none of them are low. They're all high. If we had an entropy level for supervisor manager and that was the highest, it would still be considered high. But actually in our assessment, that at 30% is one of the lowest. Everybody's experiencing entropy, but there is a real difference in how much. For those people who are reporting lived experience within the system, an entropy rate of almost 50% is obviously bringing with it many challenges for people who have lived experience, and that's obviously something that we need to focus on as a system to try and improve. one of the things that's come out, and hopefully you'll sort of see this in the report, is a bit of a correlation between the level of entropy and the degree of agency, you know, and empowerment. I think that people or bits of the sector feel in their system role. So the things that we might want to explore is how much of that sort of personal agency or kind of organizational agency a factor, and what can be done to improve it for people or parts of the system that maybe have lower levels of agency. And you know, there also seems to be quite a lot of uncertainty in the system. And I suppose the other thing is kind of community involvement and collaboration are all things that have been kind of consistent, but what do those actually mean for us? How do we ensure that community involvement and collaboration is working in a productive way to kind of move us out of this sort of, you know, high entropy system? So yeah, just I suppose some initial thoughts, prompts to maybe get you to have a think about, and we're kind of moving on to another check-in, which I'll let Catherine frame for you, because she's got some thoughts on what she's going to ask you to do.
So yeah, just another opportunity really after hearing that breakdown between different demographics. And I did pop in the chat that the ones that we've picked out to show you, we didn't pick out, those are the ones that Barrett Values have analysed, because there have been enough responses. So when we're talking about the sectors and different organisations that people work for, there were more options than just statutory sector, voluntary and community, and lived experience, but those are the ones that got the most responses, and therefore the ones that we can analyse a bit more in detail. So just to frame that slightly, and that's not all of the breakdown of the data, but it's the ones that we've got enough data to really go in depth into. So again, another few minutes, if you want to take a few more minutes to digest what you've heard and think again, what stands out, what hits home, what are people saying, how does it make you feel, and again, optimism or potential challenges, and feel free to share in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer any questions as well. just give you a few more minutes to write any more comments or thoughts in the chat, and then we'll go on to look at some of the comments from the open questions in the survey.
Yeah, and one of the things that we'll move on to is the next step stuff, which I guess is sort of what's behind Chris's comment, is how do we kind of share these findings broadly and kind of highlight, you know, some of the meaning behind them and find meaning behind them as well. So yeah, that's what we'll move on to in terms of some next step stuff.
Okay, as I can see, no one else is writing anything in the chat. I don't think I can see anyone that's typing, so I will go on to these next sets. And it is a lot of information, and almost you could spend 2 hours just digging down into each of the profiles that we've explored so far. So it can definitely be a bit overwhelming. So hopefully these next few slides will be slightly less data intensive. So we're now going to have a look at how we take lots of the information that we've heard and move forwards, and it's going through kind of suggestions from participants on how to do this. So there were 2 open questions in the survey, and basically asking for what people think is most important and 3 things that we should focus on. And there were lots of ideas about how we could move forwards as a system, and these have been clustered into these 5 different sort of themes. There was a real sense of people wanting deep collaborations, as one person has put, and the emphasis on being the fact it isn't superficial, short-term or tokenistic, and that was a real theme that we could see through the different values profiles as well. There's a lot of ideas and consensus around people wanting to find ways of leveraging the value of the community itself. So it might link with the energy we saw in the personal values profile and the fact that this energy wasn't expressed in the current culture. And we can see that kind of mirrored in the desired culture that people want around community and collaboration, linking in with that as well. And this community response to be designed by and informed by values, that the core values that we want to to express in the system. And there's interest in investing in a more balanced community as well, and could be interesting to explore what that means. And co-production being really at the heart of work, not just in terms of representation, but genuine partnerships between system members for the long term. And linking that with collaboration, it would be a really interesting thing to explore potentially in sense-making sessions and more widely. So I'm just going to talk you through again some more stuff that we've picked out that has been taken out of the comments from people around moving, what people want to move away from, move towards, and the process that people have suggested. And people have described it in the comments as a process of moving away from one set of values and towards another by focusing on key things and a focus on how we can do this in practice. So people wanting to move away from blame and fear, from an overemphasis on the system, not the community or person-centered goals, from inaccessible services that focus on diagnosis and prescription, focus on statutory sector issues, unequal inaccessible service provision, and a focus on diagnostic or clinical factors. So we want to move away from that and move towards a more community-led approach that challenges that thinking and practice, whilst designing how community organisations might feature in a new way. And there's a clear desire to resist returning to over-bureaucratic structures, heavy management, and move towards a more collective decision-making and an inclusive model. So you can see some of the comments there. Equality of people with lived experience, less middle management, and coming together as a big wider system rather than operating in the siloed kind of mentality in smaller systems that don't necessarily work as well. And people's thoughts on the process is to move towards focusing on the impact of trauma, and particularly given the context of the kind of collective trauma of COVID, an interesting perspective to dig deeper into. A better understanding of what we mean by complex needs, getting to the root cause, not just symptom management, exploring risk aversion and caution that's present in the current system, and acknowledging some of the factors, I think, that are limiting things, so such as competition as a driver for how things are. And this sort of takes us to this point, and we've got 20 minutes left of this, and there might be opportunity to have further discussions and people exploring this a bit more. But what now? So we've heard all of this information and lots of different value profiles, and there's lots of opportunities to dig deeper into every bit of this, the survey, and this is just an overview of the results. The wider report will have a lot more information in it, breakdown and context, and also ideas and suggestions from Barrett Value Centre about things we might want to look at given what our profile as a system has come up, how it's come up. So there will be this sense-making process, and really what this is an opportunity to dig deeper into the results, explore what this means for ourselves individually within our organisations and the wider system, and consider next steps and where we want to focus our attention, develop activity, and maximise opportunities. And the sense making will be collective, so we can make the shared meaning and come up with a shared understanding of what this is telling us, at least in maybe how we want to move forwards, whilst acknowledging the difference of experiences within the system that have happened pre-COVID and also currently. So this is really just the beginning of the journey. And we had wanted to hold the sense-making process as soon as possible, as Nick referred to earlier. But because of pressures and COVID and lots of context, this will likely start in January 2021, and it will be open and as collaborative as we can make it, although most likely virtual as things stand. So in the meantime, kind of shortly after this presentation, and we've got another presentation of results this afternoon to another group of people, and the presentation will go up on the website. We've also got a Jamboard, and unfortunately that link there is as short as we could make it, but we can send that round to all attendees afterwards, just to share any further thoughts or reflections you might have, and keeping engaged in what's going on. And so, yeah, I think it's just emphasising this is just the start, and there are lots of opportunities to take things forwards. But it's doing that collectively and doing that together in the next few months. So this is just this final opportunity to take 5 minutes or so to think about everything that you've heard, how you're feeling, what you think you might take away from this today, or what you might do, what stands out, and kind of, yeah, how you're feeling, and any questions as well. If anyone's got any questions, then pop them in the chat, and we have a little bit of spare time to have a conversation and a further wider discussion if people would like to.
I suppose for us, we've kind of presented it this way because we thought that was the best way to share it and give people an opportunity to see some high level stuff and contribute. I'm just conscious that we've asked people just to put it in chat, but if anybody's got any comments they want to say verbally, we've got now about 15 minutes before the end of the time, so we can open it up that way as well if people wanted to kind of say anything or start a bit of a discussion or ask anything.
And I'm happy to just respond to a couple of the questions again. So I know, Ros, you've asked about the definition of co-production and collaboration, and it comes, I feel like it's the same answer I've said before. It's how people have interpreted that. So they've used those words in the comments, and those are words we've picked out, but actually what we mean by those is something we probably need to explore through those sense-making processes, because they're words that are bandied about a lot in meetings and conversations, and I think coming together with a collective understanding of what we do mean by that is probably a good idea and way that we can move forward with it. And Pandora, in terms of the appetite for change across the network, I think that when we think about the personal values and looking at where the development in the current culture from the pre-COVID and desired culture, there is the fact that there is a focus at level 4 values, which is around transformation, shows that there is a real appetite for change. And I think that is the thing that Barratt Value Centre have been quite not surprised at, but in awe of in some ways about our profile, is that there is a lot of entropy, but there is still such a huge appetite for change, and people want that transformation. So there is that kind of sense of desire there, which I think is the opportunity that we can sort of seize. You're on mute, Pandora. Oh, you're on mute again, Pandora.
Oh,
There we go.
is it working now?
Yes.
You'd think I'd get the hang of it by now, wouldn't you? I had a sneaky little connected question, which is, given the small cohort of lived experience people involved in the survey, what's the sort of plans or the vision for bringing them closer to the centre of all of this work?
So the network works with the lived experience network, which is in development. It's hosted by Good Organisation, and I think from all of the different bits of work within the network, and obviously this spans wider than the network, and there was only, I think it was 38% who answered the survey felt they were part of the network, but it's involving the lived experience group and helping build that group up to both support the network, not support, but we can support them, and having that symbiotic relationship rather than a kind of a power dynamic relationship, as well as like trying to support, and I think the learning and adaptation that people want is part of that that process as well. So it's sort of, I think the results of the survey will impact a lot of the work within the network and the lived experience group. And I think that it is an important part of the culture change that people want to see when we think about collaboration and co-production and the equality, that it will be a focus. And how that happens, who knows? And that's something to think about and make sense of in the sense making, because it's I think the survey and system change as a whole, it's understanding how we all have to make those small changes to enable that to happen, and not put the responsibility on people with lived experience, but actually put responsibility on the system as a whole.
It's good to hear, thanks.
Right. Does anybody else want to jump in and ask any questions or give any reflections verbally, just whilst we've got a few more minutes? if not, we can just go on to the next slide is only any questions, so clarifications, and obviously we'll stay on for the next 10 minutes, and if people want to stay, then go ahead. And yeah, feel free to, we can just have a more open conversation. But if we can just this just gives you a bit of places to go to for further questions and to keep engaged in things. And just a big thank you from both Nick and I for bearing with us through technology and presenting virtually. It would be much nicer to be able to do this in a room where we could have smaller, more engaging discussions. But hopefully this has given you an overview of the results and is just the start of further conversations. So to keep engaged, we will be putting the slides up on the MCN website, and we will also be sending them out to all of you as well. And as I said earlier, the Jamboard is there, that just to put any comments that you might not have put in the chat, and it's you can do that anonymously, and just click on that link and I will circulate that to you all as well. And if you've got any further questions that you want to discuss, not in an open forum, then do contact me or Nick. And if you want to join the mailing list, where you will get updates for the sense making sessions, and they will be in our newsletters as well, then do email Emmy, whose her email address is just there. So hopefully that's been informative and not too overwhelming. And yes, thank you all for bearing with us, and it's been good to sort of get these results out now, and we can think about how we do things going forwards.